I think about this topic of calm striving. And I think about it from a lot of different perspectives. I think about it from the perspective as just a human being who's waking up and moving through the world and really working to try and achieve meaningful things in my own life. I think about it in the context of work. I am somebody who is wired to create things. My sparchetype or impulse for work that makes me come alive is the maker. So I wake up in the morning and it is about making ideas manifest, the process of creation. It's this fiercely generative state. We are in a moment in time right now where we're sort of coming back to a place of relative calm, but at the same time there's a lot of groundlessness. So working to access a sense of calm when we feel like the ground beneath us is perpetually moving is a really challenging thing. And that's a challenging thing just in the context of being alive, of moving through each day. And then when we layer on top of that, the notion of striving to be a better person, striving to deepen into our relationships and be present, striving to build something substantial in the world, striving to show up as more ourselves, striving to bring something new into the world as I have recently, it can be a challenge. And so I was thinking about this topic. It's something I reflect on a lot because I am somebody who is driven to work hard and to try and make a lot of things happen. And at the same time, I deeply value my sense of peace and ease and equanimity. And I'm always balancing these two different things with each other, and trying to figure out how do I actually step into life, set big goals, have grand visions, work towards them, deal with all of the things that, the stumbles and the fumbles and the mistakes and the obstacles that come my way, because they always happen, and not get completely knocked over by them. Because a lot of moments in my life I have, I have been in the middle of a process and things didn't go the way that I wanted. And they just absolutely crushed me. And, I spent a lot of years trying to figure out, how do I approach things differently? How do I approach the process of striving to do something that really matters to me, or to be more of the person who I hope to be in the world? And also at the same time, do it in a way where I'm not letting go of as much of a sense of persistent ease, persistent grace as possible. And I've experimented with a lot of different things over the years. I've looked at a lot of different productivity tools and platforms, techniques, strategies. Fortunate to be friends with some folks who are some of the leading thinkers in this space. And you all have incredible exposure to many of those folks right here in Growth Day who have been sharing awesome things throughout the month with you. And I thought today I might take a little bit of a meta lens on this topic of calm striving, which, if you have listened into my previous Growth Day coaching sessions, you're probably not so surprised at, because it kind of tends to be my approach. I take sort of like a broader lens and a bit of a holistic approach. And I tend to think in frameworks that are helpful, at least to me, and hopefully to other people too, hopefully to you. So I want to share a bit of a framework that has been floating around in my mind for a while now. So know your why, right? So what am I talking about there? When you're working to do something that very often requires a huge amount of effort, and that doesn't happen instantly, but unfolds over a period of time where there are going to be obstacles and all sorts of challenges that drop into the path. A lot of times, if we just basically say, this is the thing I want to do, it makes sense to me, and then start marching down that path to try and achieve it, we're stepping into a space of striving. When the obstacles start to drop into our way, when the challenges that we didn't see coming happen, when things don't go as imagined, when the assumptions that we thought were sort of critical to our saying yes to this particular thing start to get proven to be wrong, which happens all day, every day, whether it's writing a book, whether it's launching a company or a business or a project or brand. When that happens, it can bring you to your knees pretty quickly. What I found is one of the things that both allows you to return to an action stance and return to a baseline level of calm and ease is having a lot of clarity around the reason that you said yes to this in the first place, really understanding your why on a deep level. Because that basically lets you revisit this thing and say, okay, so things didn't go as I planned. Things didn't go as I wanted them to go. And I didn't even see this coming. But if I really understand why I said yes to this, and if the reason why is deep and meaningful to me, and I still believe it's possible, that will allow me to kind of let go of the anxiety spin, to let go of the self-flagellation, to let go of the negativity or the doomsday scenarios. Say, okay, this isn't going the way I thought it was going, but I am deeply committed because I understand why I said yes to this project in the first place. And it means so much to me. And I still believe this is possible, that I'm going to keep going. And that also allows me to come back to a place where I can kind of say, I didn't want this. I didn't expect it, but I care about continuing on. And I'm going to come back to center here. I'm going to keep returning to my fundamental reason why. And that brings me a certain grounding experience. So that has happened numerous times in the context of writing the book Sparked. I have, I started these ideas literally after 9/11. They've been brewing for almost 2 decades. We sold the book in March of 2020, and I was immediately heads down, literally as the city, New York City, was shutting down. I had just signed a book deal and I was deepening into the process of writing what I thought would be a relatively straightforward process, what I thought would be the opportunity to travel around, talk to tons of different people, interview them, certain amount of spaciousness that would make it easy for me to kind of vanish into my creative cave, know everything would be okay, know that all the other things would be, kind of humming along, know that the podcast, which is a central part of my devotion, it's an entire company that, we employ people, and it's a big part of, the revenue that allows me to sustain myself in the road, that would just kind of keep on keeping on. And in the blink of an eye, it didn't. Part of our podcast was based around the notion that we had a studio in New York and we only recorded in person. That was part of our value set, our production value commitment. And I blinked and that all had to end, which means that we had to spend a huge amount of time completely reimagining what that production was like, what the schedule was like, what the process was like, whether we could even continue and produce something that I would still be proud of. And that took a huge amount of effort that I didn't plan for, I didn't expect, and I didn't ask for, and I didn't want, to be honest with you. And that took me away from the process of writing a book, of meeting a deadline. And then there was like deep and profound concern about my family and about the city that I lived in, about the world around me, that consumed a huge amount of my cognitive and creative and emotional and spiritual bandwidth. I didn't see any of that coming. I didn't plan for any of it. And it really started to intrude on my ability to write, to do this thing that I was striving to do, let alone do it in a calm way, just to do it at all. And one of the things that really brought me back to center was I said to myself, why did I actually say yes to writing this book? Why did I say now is the time for me to sit down and write this book called Sparked and these ideas out into the world? And my answer was, for whatever reason, the research that we've done over the years has led me to a unique insight, which is that we all have a unique imprint for work that makes us come alive, and the development of tools and ideas. And I was sitting on a giant reservoir of stories and information and intel in my head that I truly believed would be helpful in some meaningful way to other people, and it was important for me to extract that from my head, both so that there was something that people could reference that wasn't just always coming to me, but also because I believe that we spend the vast majority of our waking hours doing this thing called work. And if that thing does not in some meaningful way give us the experience of meaning or purpose or the ability to lose ourselves in flow and express the essence of who we are, then we spend the vast majority of our waking hours doing something that is largely more emptying than filling. And that to me is not okay. It's not okay in my own life. And if I could play even the smallest role in helping folks see a different way, navigate, this thing called work differently, it was really important to me to write this book, to do this body of work, because I see so much suffering in this domain. And I believe that work that we're doing at Spark Endeavors can really make a difference. So when everything was getting hard for me, when all sorts of things started crashing and burning, when we had to devote a huge amount of time to sustaining myself emotionally, energetically, taking care of my family and friends and being there for my community and completely reimagining the other business that I run, and I had thoughts of just shelving this thing. I kept going back and saying, no, this really matters to me. I understand why I said yes to this. The reason I said why, not only is it still matter to me, but as I saw what unfolded over the last year and a half, it became more important to me than ever before, because I saw people dropping into this moment of profound existential questioning and reimagining. And if I thought that what I was working on would potentially be helpful before, that feeling only got stronger and stronger and stronger and remains paramount in my reason for saying yes to doing this thing. And that kept bringing me back. Knowing my why kept bringing me back. It brought me back not just to a generative, creative, action-oriented stance, but it kept bringing me back to a grounded sense of understanding why I was showing up and doing this every day. It let me feel a certain peace of mind to return to. And from that place, it allowed me to tap into my creative juices more effectively. I'm going to let you all know something. So when Brennan came to me and he's like, hey, I said, what's the theme for like the upcoming month? And he's like, focus and discipline. And I'm thinking to myself, that's great, because I have none of either. But at the same time, somehow I managed to get a lot of stuff done on any given day. But I started to realize a couple of years back that discipline, that getting astonishing things done, that achieving at the highest level, it was not just an inside game and not just an outside game. It was a blended game. And that so many of us focus on one particular thing, and we end up realizing that we're doing one thing well, we're doing one thing poorly, but we're not getting where we want to go. We don't have the discipline to do it. We don't have the focus to do it. We keep wandering off. And we become really good starters and really terrible finishers. And I know nobody here, of course, I'm talking about myself. When you look at the people who've actually, the world views as having astonishing focus and astonishing discipline, and who are able to accomplish incredible things, that there are some commonalities with them. Now, my mind kind of works in frameworks. So I started to really deconstruct a lot of my own experiences, the opportunity that I've had to sit down with hundreds of some of the most accomplished people from literally every domain of life, and then pour into the academic research on everything from goal setting to achievement, to focus, to attention, and things like that, and developed my own framework. And I call it success scaffolding. Now, that scaffolding, think of it as this is a superstructure that you build both around you in your environment, in your relationships, and it's also an infrastructure. It's a structure that you build in your mind, in your body, and they work together to allow you to accomplish astonishing things. They effectively install focus and discipline. And by doing that, they help the likelihood that you're actually going to show up and accomplish amazing things. They help that become your reality. So let's dive into it. We hear these words discipline, we hear the word grit out in the world a lot. I've had the opportunity to sit down in conversation with the primary researcher on grit, Angela Duckworth, a number of times over the years, and really go deep into it. And we hear that, it's this thing that people either have or they don't have, similar to you either have focus or you have discipline or you don't have it. And what we started to realize is that's actually not entirely true at all, that a lot of this stuff is practicable, it's buildable, it's installable. So First one is picture, right? So we want to create a picture of the thing that we want to accomplish or do, or the place we want to go. Large or small, it really doesn't matter. A lot of times we think about that thing we want to accomplish, and we kind of keep it spinning in our minds, right? But we never memorialize it in any meaningful way. And the problem is, when we never memorialize it, we don't entirely know what we're working towards. We don't know what it looks like, what it feels like, what it'll be like when we're there, what the fundamental qualities of it will be. So we never really truly understand what is the first step in, because we're not clear exactly on what it is that we want to move towards. So one of the first things we want to do is to create a picture of this thing that we want to move towards or accomplish. So for me, if that's a book, so I literally just turned in the next book a couple of weeks ago, for me, that was getting really, really clear on what this book is going to be. What's the theme? What's the big idea? What's the promise? What are the core ideas and the supporting ideas? But I'm also somebody who's hyper visual. I don't know about you, and I'm a maker. I make ideas manifest. That's my sparketype or archetype or impulse for work that makes me come alive. So I needed to go a step further and really envision, what does the physical object look like? And that actually helped me sit down and figure out how I'm going to start working on this thing. So when you create that picture in your mind, you want to do two things: be specific and be sensory. Again, this is all in the mind map. So be specific and be sensory. Be as clear and as granular and as specific as you can get. Behavioral psychologist at Stanford, BJ Fogg, calls this crispifying the idea. Make it really crisp, right? Super clear. It's like you're taking a lens on a camera that's out of focus and turning it so everything comes into super clear focus, and you have a lot of specificity in what you're doing. And then make it sensory. Give it sound, give it a visual, give it motion, give it scent, if that's what you want. Make it tactile. What does it feel like? Right? So create this picture, make it as much as you can. If you literally have a camera and you have a sense, people do this all the time now. They create boards, whether you call them pin boards or vision boards or whatever it is, to actually get as detailed, as granular, as visual, and as sensory as you can. You want to create a picture which is detailed enough that it makes you start to feel things. And that becomes really important, because your brain actually is a little bit like a GPS. Neuroscientist who works out of Harvard and Harvard Medical School professor Srini Pillay says that when you get super clear on this thing that you want to move towards, create, or achieve, that it becomes like this implanted GPS in your brain. Your neurocircuits actually start to work on the steps that will get you there without you even having any understanding of the fact that your brain is now working 24/7 on getting there. Notice I didn't start where most people start, right? Most people start with making a plan. We're going to get to that. But that is also one of the big stumbling points for so many people. First, you want to get clear on where it is you want to go. Now, before I move on to the second B, I want to answer a question that comes up very often, which is, what if you just don't know? What if you're not entirely clear? Now, I live and work in the world of business and entrepreneurship and startups. So I work with a lot of founders. And a lot of times when a founder is trying to start something, whether it's a private practice or a platform or business, they have some sense of what they wanted to do and the problem they wanted to solve, but they don't know the details yet. And they kind of know that that's going to unfold over time. So if the thing that you're thinking about accomplishing, if the thing that you want to harness focus and discipline towards is not really super easy to make specific and sensory at this moment in time, zoom the lens out just a touch. And what you want to do is think about, what are the essential qualities of that thing, right? So I know if I'm looking to launch a company, I kind of know the qualities. I know what culture I want, what people I want. I can get a lot more specific in the context of qualities. And while that may not be as effective, that gets me way past just having some sort of nebulous idea spinning in my head. And then be sure to memorialize this, right? Either write it out, like literally, like take a page and write out what this picture is, take pictures, draw it, film videos, whatever you need to do to make it real to you. That's what we want to do. in the real world, confidence is very often unavailable at the moments where you have to make the biggest decisions, and there is no way to actually get it. What we started thinking about here is the fact that it's not about confidence in real life, nor do you want it to be about confidence. It's about the opportunity to be changed by a moment or an experience. Because the truth is, in the real world, the only way to be 100% confident about anything is if you've already done it, or if someone else has already done it. And at that point, confidence doesn't really matter, because when you're 100% confident that it will work and you will succeed, you have simultaneously reduced the stakes to a point where you won't care even if you succeed. It just doesn't matter anymore. So I'm going to propose to you that it's actually not about confidence. That's really not what we're going for here, right? I'm going to propose an alternative frame to you. And that's that it's the moments you're not confident, but find a way to do it anyway, that hold the greatest opportunity for growth. So rather than us trying to figure out how can I get confident, how can I do the things that will make me feel 100% confident, how can I gather the facts or the skills of the information, the things that matter the most, the places where the stakes are the highest and the opportunity for growth and success and amazement and awe and connection and serendipity and impact and purpose and meaning, those experiences, those interactions, those moments, those endeavors and pursuits, guess what? You will never have anywhere close to 100% confidence in your own ability to pull it off, or in the world rallying to support it or you. But you got to find a way to act anyway, because those are the windows. Those are the moments. Those are the seasons of our life when we don't know, but somehow we still act. And when we actually can find a way through, when we keep making decisions and taking actions and keep stepping forward and forward and forward, even when our head is spinning and the world is uncertain and we have very little confidence, we just don't know if it's going to work or not. When we find the ability to do that, and then we progress through it and we take baby steps towards this vision that we have, that is the most magical place to be. It's not even the achievement of the end state that really fuels us up and lights us up. It's the process. It's the process of growing. It's the process of putting yourself in a place where you have the opportunity to be changed by the experience. And if you are 100% confident that you can do it and that the universe will support it and there's no way to fail, it doesn't matter to you anymore. What you have effectively done is made yourself comfortable, but eliminated the opportunity to experience growth. I'm going to suggest something different here. Instead of pursuing confidence, what I'm going to suggest is that we take a different approach, that we cultivate unconfident action meta skills, that we actually intentionally put ourselves in a place on a regular basis where we go out into the world and we don't know how it's going to end, where there's no easy way to have confidence that this is going to work or we will be able to pull it off and still be okay there, because that is the fertile ground of life. So let's talk about some of these skills, okay? I call these the ABCs. The first one is awareness and ease. What I'm talking about here is the ability to see clearly and find peace in the space of groundlessness. So that's really kind of two things, but the practices are related. We want to know that we're looking out into the horizon and we can see as clearly and truthfully as possible, and also looking internally and understanding what is my internal state? How clear can I get about that? I want to become aware of the internal and external states, because that is one of the things that will allow me to make effective decisions rather than spinning all sorts of anxiety-based or doom-based projections, right? We want to become aware. And we want to cultivate the practices that will let us feel a sense of ease. The second one is bravery. And what I'm talking about when I talk about bravery is a willingness to act even when you don't know if it will work. And the third thing, right, this is the C here, is conviction. And when I'm talking about conviction, I'm talking about a deep knowing around why it matters and what the stakes are. So those are what I call the ABCs of cultivating action in the face of unconfidence. Let's start with conviction. So when I talk about conviction here, what I'm really talking about is to ask the why question 5 to 10 times, and then we're going to step away from it, ask it again, and journal. Now, why is this so important in the context of us doing things, knowing that no matter how much we try, there is no one moment where if the stakes are high and we haven't already done it before, that we will ever be 100% confident. So it can be these tiny little moments, or it could be launching something huge into the world or starting a new career. When we do that, we're taking a risk and we're going to stumble along the way. And the bigger it is, the more complex it is, the longer the time frame, the more likely it is that we're going to keep meeting barrier after barrier after barrier. When that happens, one of the things that allows us to continue to take steps and make decisions is understanding why we said yes to it in the first place. But very often, when we ask ourselves, well, why does this matter to me? We come up with a superficial answer at first. And then if we keep drilling down, though, but why does that answer matter to me? And then why does that answer matter to me? And then why does that answer matter to me? So if I'm going to move from one place to an entirely different state or country, I could say, well, I'm moving from New York to Colorado, for example. And I would say, well, there's a lot of risk involved in that. I'm not confident in myself that I'll be able to handle the move and work effectively and be okay. And I don't, but I still have to take some action. And I would say to myself, well, why would it matter to me to be there? Well, because, I love the outdoors and, there's snowboarding nearby and, okay. But why does that matter to me? Well, because there's something about the outdoors. And when I'm snowboarding on a mountain that changes the way that I feel. Okay. And why does that matter to me? Well, because as you get deeper into life, very often, you become more attuned to the passage of time. And I am attuned to that. And I want to know that in whatever time I have on this planet, I'm doing things that allow me to feel connected and alive. And then you keep going like that 2 more times until you get to a place where you get the most authentic answer. And here's what you do then. Instead of writing it down saying, I'm done, you walk away, because the real juice happens after you do that. Because you take a pause, but your brain does not. Your subconscious brain keeps running the script, running the question over and over and over. You don't even realize it. And then 3 days later, you're walking down the street and your brain says, this is the real reason why. And when you get that, you write it down, you write about it, you reflect on it, you journal it, and you put it in print, not by typing it into a computer, but by literally writing it with your hands. It's because it changes the brain. It wires it differently when you memorialize things that way. So you write it down. And this is so important because when you start to stumble, when you hit roadblocks, when things happen that keep you questioning, what happens is when you can revisit the deepest why, it gives you this sense of conviction. It says, oh, this is why this mattered to me. This is what the stakes are. And I care deeply about these stakes. So even though I don't know if I'm going to succeed, I'm not really confident in my ability to pull this off. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to keep taking action because it really, really matters to me. So excited to dive into this topic for so many different reasons. It's kind of like the center of life in my mind. One of the longest running studies on human flourishing, the Harvard study, also known as shorthand as the Grant study, basically tracked a whole bunch of people. It was actually done on men. And from what I understand, they're now in a second wave of that study where it's going to be multi-gender, which is pretty amazing. But what they did was they literally tracked people over a period of generations in their lives and measured almost every single thing that was going on to try and determine what makes for a good life, what makes people happy, what makes them flourish, what gives them a sense of meaning. And the longest running curator of that study was once asked, of all the different things that you have looked at, of the biometrics, the physiology, all like geography, career, all these different things, is there any one thing that really stood out as being sort of determinative of a life well lived? And his answer was love, full stop. And going deeper, it's the quality and depth of the relationships that we form that really make life extraordinary on so many levels. When I think about the work that I've been doing for probably about 2 decades now, and Brendan's been doing, so many of us that have this amazing privilege of being here with you, it's really looking at these big questions. And no matter where you look, this idea of relationships and how we relate to other people, it just keeps coming back to the center of the stage. And with good reason. It's that important. There's a ton of data that now shows that, but we don't need data. We know that intuitively. And if we had questioned that in any way, shape, or form, this last 16 months have pretty much reminded people how important other people are to them and their lives, to their happiness, to their sense of flourishing, their sense of connectedness. It's been a bit of a relationship cauldron to a certain extent. And I'm not just talking about intimate partners or life partners. I'm talking about on every possible level, whether it's work relationships, professional relationships, friendship relationships, enemy relationships, compassionate relationships, companionate relationships, romantic relationships. Everything has sort of been put under the microscope recently, and we've been tested in really big ways. I know it's been interesting for me. So I have worked from home for many years now, and I actually work full-time with my wife, Stephanie, and we play different roles in our company, and our entire team is distributed literally around the country and even internationally. So we've had to learn how to work in these kind of weird different modes that a lot of the world has been forced to switch to in the last year and a half or so. And we kind of figured, okay, so this is going to take some figuring out, but we kind of have it dialed in already. We didn't really know. There was a lot of work to do. And then we're working at home. And it also is very different. We spent the better part of last year in New York City, which was a tough place to be for the first 3/4 of the year. And then our daughter, who was in college, ended up having to leave early and come home. And we found ourselves, the three of us, married with my wife and with my daughter there, working full time with my wife in the apartment, with my daughter sort of like exiled from school and home and then doing school remotely. And us in a situation, especially the early part of last year, where none of us felt like we could leave home. None of us could see anybody else. We couldn't interact with other human beings. So it was a very different experience that we really were not prepared to. But at the same time, as challenging as it was, as much as it brought up, the powerful invitation to revisit how we interact with each other, how we relate to each other, how we can continue to cohabit a finite space in a way that feels both sacred and respectful, while being nourishing and alive and vibrant, and also allowing us to have our own places to go to. It's been a really interesting test. I used that word cauldron before, and I think a lot of us have felt that. What's kind of funny is we ended up moving out to Colorado in September of last year, where we were for 9 months. And then because we wanted to see some friends and come back for a little bit, the three of us just wedged ourselves into a car. We essentially took everything that we owned, got rid of a whole bunch of stuff, and sort of sealed ourselves into a Subaru with a cargo box up on top, and literally just drove over a period of a week, the 2,000 or so miles cross country back where we're actually kind of hanging out right now in a little cottage you can probably see behind me in Western Massachusetts. And that drive was sort of the, it was the final test for us. Could we actually, having figured out how to be together in like this confined space in a confined world, could we then spend a week together in a car, literally wedged into a place, because there was no room to move in this car anywhere, and be okay? And we were. It actually was kind of a fun, powerful experience. And it's reminded me so much about the important parts of life and the important parts of how to be with other people in a way that no matter what the circumstances happening around you bring you, the interrelational part of what's happening still stays healthy. It still stays constructive and generative. So over the years, I have had an astonishing opportunity to sit down with so many leading voices, luminaries, primary researchers in all different aspects of relationships, from love to friendship to collegial relationships, and learn from them. I've also studied a mountain of academic research because I'm a little bit of a geek like that. And I thought a fun thing to do, and hopefully valuable thing to do as we spend our time together today, was to share a little bit of things that have come to me, my own insights. But I also wanted to take a couple of the really key lessons that have been shared with me by guests on the Good Life Project podcast over nearly a decade now that I have found to be utterly transformative on a relationship topic. So I'm going to talk about three different things and a couple of different people here. And we'll start out with something called bids. So the power of bids. Now, the notion of bids was introduced to me originally by a couple who I met, John and Julie Gottman. Now, John and Julie have been together for a very long time in their own professional and personal relationship. And they've ended up in the beginning, John was primarily a researcher. He was an academic, taught at a university, ran a lab, and he researched love. Julie was a clinical psychologist who focused intensely on relationships too. And they used to have these really fun debates with each other because John would say, this is what's happening in the laboratory. We know it. Here's the data. And Julie would say, but dude, this is what's happening in my clinical practice. Like when I'm sitting in front of people face to face, actually talking with them, it's a totally different experience. It's fun to be in a room, to watch them sort of like interact and trade with each other, like tossing the baton between each other, and see how they built this beautiful relationship. But they introduced and they noticed this fascinating thing, which is that on any given moment in time, what happens with two people in a room, whether it's romantic couples, whether it's friends, whether it's colleagues, is pretty much all day, every day, we are in some way really big and overt or kind of more subtle and nuanced. We are bidding for the attention and affection of other people. And what John and Julie did in this sort of like long-term longitudinal research was they looked at couples, newly married couples, and they would just sort of like watch their interactions in a room. And they were able to predict over a long period of time who was going to actually stay together and who was not. And in fact, they classified these partnerships into two different things that they sort of loosely termed the masters and the disasters. The people who are very likely to stay together and have, like strong relationships, the people who are very likely to end up apart. And started asking themselves, well, what's going on here? Like, can we actually identify something that's fairly universal across these two groups of people that would be predictive on a pretty consistent basis of success in relationships and failure? And what they realized was there was something much bigger happening on a meta level. And it was all about these bids for attention and affection. What they realized was that as we make bids for attention and affection all day, every day, there are generally three responses to those bids. One is what they call turning towards. So let's say I'm sitting on the couch and I'm with my wife, Stephanie. And I'm kind of sitting there and I'm like, I have this shoulders is really bothering me. It's just really tight, right? That's very likely me bidding for a little bit of attention, and maybe I don't want to just outright say it, but things like this happen all the time, or maybe I'm opening the dishwasher and there's something, like I could use a little bit of help. Maybe I walk in So all the time, we're sort of like making these bids for other people's attention and affection and help. Turning towards that would be something like would be acknowledging the bid and then in some way responding positively to it. So I'm turning towards the bid. Oh, yes. Like I see that's going on. Like if Stephanie's, got a headache, let me just help rub your temples. So turning towards is acknowledging the bid and then turning towards it in a constructive and positive way. That's the first response to bids for attention and affection. Second is turning away, which means you're kind of like, whether you see it or not, you choose not to acknowledge it and not to respond to it in a constructive or positive way. The third is what they categorized as turning against. And this is not only not being helpful or not giving the person the attention or affection they want, but actively being aggressive in your response to it. So if that would be, if my shoulder hurts, or I'm a little tired, I'm a little headachy, or, that would be not Stephanie like reaching and saying, oh, like, let me see if I can help work it out a little bit, or ignoring it, but it'd be actively saying, well, it serves you right because you're being a real idiot lately and you deserve this. So there are these three different things, right? So there's the bid for attention and affection, and then the three responses: turning towards, turning away, and turning against. We may or may not have been comfortable making friends as kids. Everyone sort of lies on a different part of the spectrum there. But what's kind of universally shared is that by the time we're an adult, whether you have a family or not, whether you're working a full-time job or not, we tend to change. We tend to be more protected, tend to be more suspicious. We tend to be less open, less vulnerable. And making new friends very often gets harder. Not for everybody, but from what I've seen, for most people, certainly for me, I'm raising my hand when I say that. I'm like, I am a member of that club. And I think a lot of times also we rely on the friends that we made from as far back as we can imagine because they know us the best and we trust them the most and they trust us the most. And we know that it takes a certain investment of energy and a risk of exposing who we are to make new friends. And once we're a little bit further into life, a lot of times we just don't want to go there. Like we're navigating and grappling with so much that the idea of spending that energy, of putting ourselves out, of taking the risk of not being accepted, it's just too much. So we kind of shut down and we accept, our friendship lot for the moment that we're in, and sometimes for life. And I'm sharing this because in no small part I'm describing myself. I love people, but I'm also introverted. I love people, and I'm also what Elaine Aron would describe as a highly sensitive person, which means that in part, I get sensitive in social situations to the extent where even loud noises or being in an environment that's super noisy for an extended period of time can make me start to withdraw. So I've had to figure out, okay, how do I have a vibrant set of friends and regular interaction with them and actually, quote, put myself out there, knowing that I'm actually pretty happy hanging out. I'm literally like in a recording studio where the walls are on either side of me and they're all padded. It's as quiet and cozy as you can get. Like, how do I step out of this setting? Or how do I invite people into this setting and create those friendships that aren't just superficial, but change you and sustain you for life? I run a couple of companies right now, but one is called Good Life Project. And we're most known, I think, these days for the podcast that we create. But bigger picture, for 5 years, when you zoom the lens out, we actually ran an adult summer camp where for generally the last 4 days of summer, every summer for 5 years, we would drop into this 160-acre kids sleepaway camp. Of course, after they clean the whole place out, because there was a lot of cleaning to do after the kids. And it was this great facility and it was kids bunks, they weren't winterized or summerized. You get what you get, a dozen bunks to each building. And we would kind of swoop in and we'd take it over. And we would spend the better part of the entire year figuring out how to create this near magical environment. And then we would welcome, by the end, we're welcoming about 450 people every year. They would come on planes, trains, automobiles. They would come from the other side of the world. We had people from Australia. Like literally, they would travel from the other side of the planet to get to this place to spend 4 days, often with total strangers. And very often they would come alone. They didn't come as a group, although they'd always leave as a group. And, we learned over that 5-year window that there were a lot of things that we could do, that we could think through. There are a lot of mechanisms that we could create. There was an ethos that we could cultivate. We could be very intentional about creating a dynamic that allowed total strangers who were often just stepping off of 24 hours of flying, multiple connections, 14-hour time difference, crossing the date line, to drop into this place in the middle of the country in a kid's sleepaway camp, sleep a dozen to a bunk in like tiny little kids sleeping bunks, by the way, share bathrooms, and be amazingly comfortable and have it be this stunning experience, where our favorite thing to know would be like they came alone and they would leave with lifelong friends. So let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we learned through this 5-year experience of running our own adult summer camp. It's kind of fun. One of the first lessons that we really learned is that we needed to create what I called a safe container. Now, we did this in the context of, we literally took over a kids' sleepaway camp. We removed people from their day-to-day environment. So all the stresses, all the distractions coming at you, all the devices that you're like distracting yourself with, like the phone calls, everything, the people bumping into you, none of that existed. So one of the things I realized is incredibly powerful is if you literally remove yourself to a place where it's almost you're stepping out of the ordinary world and into the extraordinary world. And you can almost think of this as the hero's journey of friendship. It's sort of what Joseph Campbell wrote about when he talked about the hero's journey. At some point, you cross the threshold and you leave the ordinary world and you step into the extraordinary world. And in my mind, making really deep new friendships, you could really see as a hero's or a heroine's journey. And it starts by stepping out of the ordinary world and into the extraordinary world. And we want to create a safe container for people to step into. And like I said, you can do that in the virtual space too. Brendan's done it. The whole team has done it in this community that we have here. So what actually makes it safe? Well, the physical environment, we wanted to really remove distractions. We want to create emotional safety also. And part of that we do by actually creating what I would call a shared ethos, or a shared value set. So when people would think about coming to camp, one of the things that they would actually think about is, well, will the people there be my people? Well, how do we know if they're my people? Same thing if you're like kind of thinking about, well, do I approach this other person, maybe make a new friendship? I'll know, are they my people? Because if they're not my people, then this could get ugly fast. It's gonna be a really uncomfortable conversation, and I'm gonna feel awkward, and then I'm gonna run for the door, and then so that can still happen, and that's kind of the fun of actually putting yourself out there. Says the guy who hides in a digital cave as he speaks to you. And but what we did was, we realized that we needed to actually somehow telegraph our values and beliefs so that people could kind of like, before they even step into it, be like, oh yeah, I kind of see the world like this person and these people in this community. The way we did that was a couple of ways. I mean, number one, we had a lot of people who were listening to the podcast over a period of weeks and months and years. They started to understand my personal value set and know that that was a part of the community that we were creating. So they built it around what they knew of me. But we also wanted to separate it from me. And we actually created what I called a living creed. So this was a statement of belief. Some people might call it a manifesto. It was basically a one-page statement of beliefs, and statement of values. And we published that for years. It was actually sort of front and center on our website. And we would make that also a part of camp. We say, this is what we believe in. If you go to the Good Life Project website now, for example, and look at the About page, we don't have that creed up there anymore. But it's really clear reading our story, what our values and beliefs are, what we aspire to, and what's meaningful to us, what's important to us. And I think we do that, in the digital domain by kind of like putting it out there. And this was in the context of somebody saying yes to an experience that would potentially allow them to create new friendships. So we can do that on an individual basis also. We may not necessarily put out like a statement of values and beliefs, but what we don't realize is we're actually doing that all day, every day. Old school version of that is, a lot of it was about what we wore. I'm a big fan of printed t-shirts, and the olden days where you go to concerts and you'd always come home with your concert t-shirt, and basically, whoever you were wearing said a lot about who you were, what your values were, what was important to you, the type of things that you liked. And that actually telegraphed a lot of it. These days, when we're trying to actually get a beat on, well, like, could this person be an interesting friend? And maybe we kind of want to know a little bit more about them before we even approach them. Social media has become the new printed t-shirt. So many people are out there on Instagram and Facebook, and these days Discord and all the different platforms. And we're sharing all day, every day. And we're not only sharing our own stuff, we're sharing other people's stuff that resonates with us. And what we're effectively doing is we're identifying an ethos around our values, our beliefs, our hopes, our aspirations, our fears, our desires. And we are publishing that to the world to say, know me. We don't realize necessarily that's why we're doing it. We're just like, hey, this is fun, or this is cool. We're putting it out there. But what's happening underneath the surface is we are sharing a deeper part of ourselves, and in part because we want to be known, but in part what it also does is it telegraphs something that leads in front of us should we then meet somebody, or somebody want to actually reach out to us and become friends, because they'll say, hey, we see the world similarly. We share similar values and beliefs, and I want to know you. And it makes that conversation a little bit more comfortable. It creates that safety that I was talking about. It's one of the things that goes into creating a safe container that can potentially lead to friendship. The topic for today, and really for the month, advanced mindset and resilience. The way that I think about resilience when I think about it is the ability to move through moments and sometimes entire seasons of adversity, so that the experience of moving through it, the experience of interacting with it, the experience of dancing with it is something where you can access the greatest amount of equanimity, of peace and ease during the experience. I was thinking about what's the strongest experience that I've had where I've had to be incredibly resilient. And I kind of was focusing on business. So we actually run two companies, and one of them is a media company. And we produce this flagship podcast called Good Life Project. We've been doing it for years. We actually started as a video show, filming on location with a crew and cameras. And we transitioned 2 years into that to become pure audio, just a podcast. And we air twice a week. So we have a very aggressive production schedule. I made a commitment very early on that we were not only going to create the most extraordinary production values that we could, but also the most intimate, the most real, the most open, honest, and revelatory conversations that we could do. We built a place to actually host this, where I controlled the entire environment. I would invite people in, and they would come in, and we would close the door behind them. And we'd sit in these two really comfy chairs with this super plush rug in a pretty intimate setting, and with headphones on so we could hear each other in our ears and we could see each other. We're looking at each other. That in-person format, for me, it was sacred. So we're 6 years into this format. We're known for hosting these intimate in-person things where you can literally hear the occasional siren coming through the studio, like the 4 layers of acoustic glass. And my belief, I have this deeply held belief that we cannot host the quality and the depth of conversation that I am comfortable producing if we have to do it remotely? And then all of a sudden, a year ago hits. We had a quick meeting with the team and said, okay, we can't do this anymore. We can't, this thing that we've held so sacred, our entire business, our pride, my ego, the brand was built around the extraordinary quality of the conversations and the production value of being in a studio, being up close with these really super high quality microphones and no echo and things like that. We had to make a decision because we were faced with mass disruption. And remember last year, everything kind of hit New York very early in the year. And New York just started to shut down everything. It was like the dominoes are falling in everything within a matter of days. The entire city is just shutting down. And we're thinking to ourselves, okay, so if we stick to this ethos, we're going to go on hiatus, or we're literally going to shut down the company and the community and the podcast. And we had other shows that we had started to work on developing as well. So the choice was, we didn't want this level of disruption. We didn't ask for it. We didn't see it coming. Nobody saw it coming. But here it is. This is adversity on the extreme level where it effectively had the potential to take out my entire business. But also, it made me kind of rethink, what are the assumptions? What are the assumptions that have gotten me to this place? And how can I change those assumptions? How can I respond to it? How can I see the possibility side of what's happening here and not just feel like I'm being pummeled all day, every day by the disruption, by the adversity? Because that's the heartbeat of resilience, is being able to see the other story in the face of adversity. So what we did was start to test, and we started to say, okay, so there's a certain amount of forgiveness in the world right now. We all know that we're doing the best that we can. Why don't we take this window of time? Let's experiment. How close can we get to what we were able to do in person in the studio? And what we found was we started testing all these different platforms, and we're like, sort of like the Goldilocks story, not quite, not quite, not quite. And then eventually we started to land on platforms for different things that were like, you know what? It's not the same as being in the studio, but it's good enough for now. So then we said, okay, how do we take this and try and make it even better? And we started to test a wide range of microphones that were shippable. And we started shipping microphones around to all of our guests. So if anybody didn't have the quality of recording equipment that we felt was important, we would literally buy it for them. And we still do that to this day. We realized that there was a lot that we could do in post-production. So we up-leveled our team. Our editor went into and trained to learn a lot more about post-production. We brought on a high-level sound engineer to fix all sorts of things. And that added a lot to the back end of what we're doing. But what we started to learn over time is that this assumption that I had about the only way that things are going to be okay is if we do it this way. When adversity dropped into my lap, when it sort of exploded into the world and into my world and my business, and I couldn't do it that way anymore. I literally, all the assumptions that I made and all the choices that were based on those assumptions were blown up. I could not keep making those choices. I can either shut it down and cave to adversity, or I can say, okay, so what is the possibility story here? How do we dance with this? How do we move through it? And what we start to realize is this now opens the entire universe to us. So now, if there's a guest in a different country, or if there's a guest across the country, or there's a guest in the Southern Hemisphere, we can now coordinate that. So all of a sudden, we're able to sit down with people who just never would have been able to be on the podcast and in conversation with me. What I discovered was, because so many people are actually doing it from their homes, that the home created its own sense of virtual intimacy or remote intimacy. They were intimate in their space. I was intimate in my space. And that intimacy, even if it was 1,000 miles apart, it bridged the chasm to create this sort of, like virtual ethereal container of safety and sanctity. And that really surprised me. And now, as we sort of like step into what I would consider, emerging our way slowly into a new season, now we're starting to actually think about, well, where do we go from here? When in fact it is safe to be back in a room, back in a studio together, are we going to automatically do that? And my honest answer right now, because we've been so convinced and so blown away and so surprised by dropping our assumptions, by simply kind of surrendering to the truth of the circumstance, and by actively seeking out the possibility story, and then trying to increase the volume of possibility as much as humanly possible, we've been really dramatically surprised because there are some really powerful benefits to not doing it. So not only do I feel like we have sort of bounced back to the place that we were before, but I think we've balanced forward to a certain extent to increased possibility. We may very well end up doing a hybrid model where we film and we record and we do the audio in studio, and then a whole bunch of other things we do remotely, because now we know how to do that. And because now people we want to speak to and people who want to speak to us, we can bring ourselves together in the virtual space in a way that either never would have happened face to face, or it would have taken months or years to pull the whole thing off. So I think the meta idea, when I think about adversity and resilience, it's sort of like the key for me is really, it's the notion of what I call the possibility story, right? So, and I call it the law of possibility. Is this a proven law? No, but it sounds kind of fun. For every disruption, there is an equal and opposite possibility. So our job in moments of adversity is to ask the question, what is the possibility story?
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.